Look, have you ever been pushing forward, really trying to do the right thing, trying to live out your faith and purpose, only to find yourself just completely, utterly exhausted? You wake up with this deep spiritual fatigue, and you just can't help but wonder, man, am I doing something wrong here? Well, today we're unpacking some profound source material that completely reframes this whole experience. Welcome to this explainer. We're going to break down the signs from this text suggesting that, actually, scratch that, you aren't failing at all. Instead, you might just be what the author calls dangerously anointed. Let's get into it.
Why does everything feel harder right when I decided to obey God? I bet for a lot of you, that question hits the nail right on the head. It perfectly validates that internal monologue you've been wrestling with. The text describes this as a seriously confusing and honestly pretty painful part of the faith journey. A person makes the choice to step up and into their calling, and, well, instead of the clouds parting and angels singing, they run straight into a brick wall of intense resistance.
Okay, let's dive into this. There is this huge, super common myth out there that true obedience attracts comfort. But as you'll see, the source material we're looking at today presents a completely different reality. Anointing attracts conflict. The core argument here is that the unseen world targets what is chosen. The whole premise is that if you don't grasp the unseen dynamics at play, you're literally going to think God just up and abandoned you. The author is suggesting that the pushback you're facing, it's not a penalty for doing something wrong. Actually, it's confirmation that you're doing something right. So, to help map out this paradigm shift, here is our roadmap for today. First, the cost of anointing. Second, warfare and isolation. Third, mind battles and closed doors. Fourth, unbreakable purpose. And finally, a vital reality check.
All right, starting off with section 1, the cost of anointing and recognizing the unseen process.
The source material gives a major warning right up front. This unseen process is so frequently and falsely mistaken for personal failure. So we're going to unpack 5 specific signs to help you identify it. We've got unexplainable warfare, the wilderness of isolation, mind and emotional attacks, delays and closed doors, and finally, finding an unbreakable purpose in your pain. Definitely keep this list in the back of your mind, because according to the author, this is the exact evidence pointing to a dangerous anointing on a person's life. Moving right along to section 2, warfare and isolation. These are the external battles. The very first sign the text highlights is unexplainable spiritual warfare, and the underlying premise here is wild. You don't actually need to have done anything wrong to face intense resistance. Drawing on Ephesians 6:12, the author reminds us that our struggle is not against flesh and blood. So the text really wants to reassure readers here. Waking up feeling drained out of absolutely nowhere, or getting hit with sudden emotional heaviness, that is not weakness. Instead, it's presented as proof that your calling carries weight and the unseen world has definitely noticed. And this brilliantly illustrates the second sign, which is entering the wilderness of isolation. The text backs this up with some amazing historical case studies. Think about biblical figures like David and Joseph. They both went through these intense, incredibly lonely seasons where they felt completely, totally misunderstood. But the source material makes a strong argument. Those seasons, they weren't abandonment, not at all. They were divine preparation designed to teach absolute dependence and to strip away the noise of the outside world. To really anchor this concept, the author points straight to Hosea 2:14. Here, the wilderness is totally reframed as God's classroom. And I love the beautiful truth highlighted in the text here. Heaven isolates what it intends to elevate. So that isolation you're feeling, it isn't a punishment. It's framed as the exact environment required to build and prepare your character. Okay, on to section 3, mind battles and closed doors. This is where we look at the internal and practical pushback. So the third sign is suffering attacks right on your mind and your emotions. The text argues that when the enemy can't just take your calling away, he pivots. He goes directly after your peace. The goal is to fill you with so much anxiety that you start doubting what you already know is confirmed. And hey, even the greatest biblical figures faced extreme emotional exhaustion. Look at Elijah. The guy experienced severe depression and fled into the wilderness literally right after calling down fire from heaven, a massive spiritual victory.
The source is super emphatic about this. The battle for your mind is absolutely real. And that is exactly why 2 Corinthians 10:5 advises us to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. The material points out that actively managing those anxious, swirling, overwhelming thoughts, that's how you fight back. And by doing that, you eventually allow the peace of God to step in and guard your heart. Now for the fourth sign, which is all about practical pushback, the endless delays and closed doors. You pray for opportunities, they just never open, and you're left wondering, did I miss a turn somewhere? But anchored by Proverbs 16:9, the text offers a really powerful reframe. When you are just begging for an open door and you get a hard no, it is very often divine protection in disguise. The author argues that those doors stay shut because God knows exactly what's hiding behind them. Let's move to and see how this builds on that understanding of delays. The source material notes something crucial. God slows you down because a promotion granted way too early can actually destroy the very thing he wants to sustain in your future. In this context, delays aren't a punishment. They are viewed as a deliberate strengthening mechanism, carefully pacing out your journey so you can handle the destination.
Which brings us to Section 4, Unbreakable Purpose in Pain, the Resilient Result.
And that leads perfectly into the fifth sign, this stubborn, outright inability to give up. The Apostle Paul totally validates this feeling in 2 Corinthians, saying, "We are hard-pressed on every side, yet not crushed." The text makes the case that, the pressure feels immense. You might experience deep, deep doubt or feel entirely unworthy, but the anointing ensures it will absolutely not destroy you. Instead, it acts like a forge, creating a resolve inside you that simply refuses to back down.
So the crucial point is this: anointing does not remove pain from your life. What it does is give your pain a purpose. All the crying, the doubting, the hurting, and those frustrating, seemingly endless delays, they are all synthesized together into one unbreakable calling. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the reality check. And we're going to shift our tone a bit here because the source material provides some vital, stabilizing nuance. And this is so important to prevent anyone from falling into toxic spirituality. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clearly the text distinguishes between genuine spiritual warfare and the very natural consequences of, human reality. While the spiritual battles we just talked about are very real, the author issues a strong warning against spiritualizing absolutely everything. Sometimes a closed door isn't an attack from the enemy at all. It's just poor decision-making or a lack of preparation on our own part. The source is urging readers to stay practical here. Isolation might not always mean you're entering God's classroom. Sometimes it might just mean you need to do some hard work on your own character. And crucially, if you are dealing with constant, severe anxiety or mental exhaustion, the text warns us not to just broadly blame it all on spiritual attacks. Very often, real psychological, emotional, or physical health issues are at play, and those simply must be addressed in a practical way. But the overarching message of the text is incredibly hopeful. Following this path is not meant to be a constant, heavy tragedy full of endless attacks. The author concludes that God did not call people just to crush them under heavy burdens, but rather to give them abundant life and real peace right in the middle of the storm. Even when we make our human mistakes, clarity and strength are always available to us. In fact, the source material suggests this one specific phrase to really anchor yourself when things get tough. Lord, sustain my anointing and give me your peace. It's essentially an invitation to embrace your journey with maturity, leaning into grace rather than just succumbing to the pressure of it all.
We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, unpacking the signs of being dangerously anointed, from that unseen warfare all the way to some very necessary reality checks. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Are you willing to endure this process with maturity, take responsibility for your part, and truly step into your calling? If so, accept the hardships as preparation, manage the human realities, and embrace the unbreakable purpose being forged inside you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep stepping forward.